talk me through, just in a surface level, what was his performance really like?
He did all right.
Yeah.
Like, he didn't make his position any worse. He didn't make it any better. And it was terrible to start with. So he's still in a terrible position. He just didn't make it worse, which was a distinct possibility, because he's a wazzock. At a really basic level, all this stuff, isn't it terrible what he came and did? I mean, if there's anyone whose character the nation knew fully well going into that vote, it's Boris Johnson. The country chose to elect a clown, and what it got in return was farce.
Yeah. So he didn't shit his pants again, but he hadn't changed his pants either, basically.
And it was interesting. You saw glimpses of, I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of it.
Yeah, I've been.
As a trained actor and as someone who also teaches drama and does a lot of auditions, there were moments that really peeled the enamel off my teeth when, he feigned choking up an emotion, but in a way, a sort of talented 7-year-old amateur child in a primary school production would, choked up a little bit and, but his friendly press sort of ate all that up and was like, Johnson chokes with emotion as he recounts terrible, terrible year. And it's like, but, he made it a terrible year, a much more terrible year than it needed to be. A lot of it was precisely as predicted. So he was very difficult to pin down on issues that were hard to answer, notably why they were late locking down the second time. But there was also a sense from the inquiry, and, I am fully gleaning into the minds of other people here and just giving you my gut reaction to what I saw in Lady Hallett and in the Council for the Inquiry. And there was the same impression that one got when they were questioning Hancock, that there came a point when they were effectively signaling to each other, we're not going to get anything useful out of this person. We're not going to get anything truthful out of this person. So why are you pressing him? We've established he's slippery. In many, many ways, the evidence against him is so incredibly clear that you don't need him to confirm that he said, let the virus rip or not. You have it there in writing, in multiple documents. So, he would sit there and say that when I used the expression, let the virus rip, I was merely expressing a view that was out there in order to test the argument in the room. I was doing it as a sort of dialectic exercise, which, might have some merit. Maybe that's what he was doing. But that's not what everyone around him thought he was doing.
Is that a hard thing about this show of sort of open justice they're going with this inquiry, let's call it, in that what it actually provides is, as you say, this opportunity for him to bullshit and obfuscate in the way that he does. But it's then very hard to balance out that I feel like the public wants to see these people publicly questioned and tested and their ideas challenged and what they've said challenged. But then if that makes it descend into a sort of circus, as someone like Boris Johnson will make everything turn into, then that's counterproductive. How do you balance out those two interests, really?
Yes, I think it might seem like that to people who are not used to the legal process, right? What it looks like to people who are used to the legal process is a barrister does not ask a question that he or she does not know the answer to. That's the bottom line. When the KC for the inquiry says to him, did you ever use the expression, let the virus rip? And Johnson says no, and he's then presented with multiple documents where he uses it. What the counsel for the inquiry is doing is setting up the paragraph in the report that will read as follows. Mr. Johnson denies he ever used the expression "let it rip." That is not credible given the evidence before us.
Yeah.
That's all it's doing. It's giving him the opportunity. It's giving him enough rope to hang himself, basically. Yeah. It's giving him the opportunity to front up and say, yes, I used it, but it was, which is what Gove did. Which is why Gove, intellectually, I think, is head and shoulders above all of them, actually. What Gove did is when he knew there was stuff there that was established, he just said, yes, I'm really sorry about that. It was a horrible time, and we are fallible human beings, and the pressure was immense, and we got loads of things wrong.
Yeah. I think Johnson is so chaotic, I suppose, that the benefit of this is then putting him into a position where it's such a narrow lane that it will just be structured. And you can go, okay, actually, this is a time where not being structured cannot serve you well, because we will just keep going and we will keep lining it up.
And it's interesting that he regressed on a lot of the Partygate stuff, for instance. So he went back to, I did nothing wrong. I still don't know what I did wrong. Yeah. That was his position. After showing up ashen-faced, and going, oh, it's terrible. I'm so sorry to the nation, but I've learned my lesson. I've read the report, and I'm going to put everything right. After, the Sue Gray report, it turns out that he'd learned nothing. He was just putting on a show, exactly as he was putting on in this, And again, the Telegraph and the Daily Mail went, terribly contrite. Johnson, held back the tears about Partygate. He was putting on a show for them. They lapped it up because they wanted to, and that was the narrative. And we see now, a year and a bit later, that he's standing up and says, I still don't know what I did wrong. We didn't have any parties. No. It was just work gatherings with beer. I mean...
Yeah. Were there any new key points which really came out here? Or was, as you said, some of the more interesting things what he forgot, the key points which were almost missing from his memory?
Yes, there was a lot of I don't remember, I don't recall, I don't know. There was even one of the more rare permutations of this, which is, if I knew, I have forgotten, which I particularly enjoyed. Yeah. So in answer to our question, he said, if I knew this, I have forgotten.
That's about the most logical thing I've heard him say, really, I suppose. You genuinely can't remember what you forgot because you have forgotten it. So it's bollocks, but at least it has some sort of logic.
I mean, I guess the answer is, like I said, I got the impression from the inquiry that they know. By now, they have seen enough of the evidence to know what happened. And what happened was this. There was a government that had its eye off the ball. This is the short story, okay? Because of Brexit, because of the election they had just won, they were on a high. Their eye was off the ball, okay? They were concentrating on other stuff. When the pandemic came to Europe, there was a sense of exceptionalism that, Italians are wankers and the Spaniards are, lazy, and we're going to cope with this much, much better, which meant they kept their eye off the ball until far too late to do anything about it, right? Johnson justified a lot of stuff by going, in retrospect. In retrospect, I would have done it differently. In retrospect, in hindsight. There's no hindsight required here. What was lacking was any sense of foresight. That's what was missing, When he stood there with his chief medical officer and his chief scientific advisor next to him, and they said, from now on, you must avoid physical contact. And he comes in with, I went to a hospital today and I shook hands with everyone. There's no foresight required there, right? There is no in retrospect there. You are not taking something seriously that you ought to. And that's what happened. So that's the first wave, right?
Yeah.
And then what happened in the second wave is that the sense had crept in that the economic effects of lockdown were too grave to be justified by just saving a few thousand old people. That's what happened. That is the short, horrible story of how the government reacted to the pandemic here. They were too late to react to the first wave, and they were too complacent to react to the second wave. And then they were completely, out of the office for the third wave, incidentally, because there was a third wave that also killed about 50,000 people. Omicron, a year later, which they completely ignored until, again, it was too late. So the lesson the COVID inquiry will learn is that there is no system for learning lessons.
No. Yeah, it sort of it redefines the idea of hindsight, doesn't it? When it seems like they required the amount of hindsight that a mouse being shocked requires to not be shocked and follow the maze to a piece of cheese. Yeah. That's not really hindsight, is it? No. That's just learning from failure.
By the third time you've done the maze, you should know that, right? Yeah. And still they go for the cheese. Mm. And so that's what happened. And it's horrible. And it cost thousands of lives. And they want to come out of it suggesting that it was an entirely novel situation, that all governments struggled, which is both things are true, right? It was unprecedented, all governments struggled, and that ultimately we ended up mid-table. We didn't end up mid-table. If you look at truly comparative countries like Germany and France and Spain, we ended up second to last. That's what happened. And if you factor into that we were the people with the biggest heads up and the most organized health system, a truly national health system, we should have been near the top, not second to bottom. And that is the aspect that I think is not coming through clearly enough by any of the commentary that I've seen, right? They all go, how did we do in comparison to Italy? How did we do in comparison to France? Well, yes, how did we do in comparison to Italy, considering we had like 6 weeks to get our ducks in a row while it hit Italy? We had 3 weeks more than France to see what was happening there and react to it, right? And if you put that into the mix, then really we did worse than any Western democracy, bar none. If you consider the fact we are an island with highly controllable borders, with a very, very compliant population. We are a population that follows rules on the whole, with a very well-organized national health system, and had 2 months to prep for this. We did fucking horribly.